At this time, I'd like to call a public hearing meeting to order at 7 o'clock. At this time, I will turn it over to our solicitor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. This is going to be a conditional use hearing for Cave Brewery Company, LLC. They are seeking a conditional use for their brewing and tap room operation. So you're aware what a conditional use is. A conditional use is the same thing as a special exception to the zoning hearing board. Conditional use, however, comes before council, the governing body. You may add reasonable conditions if you feel they are necessary at the end. They still must be reasonable, but we can discuss them. The applicant has the burden of showing it's met the general conditions of your ordinance for the use. And I can tell, in fact, I would invite the applicant to come forward and take a spot that we can hear him. Come on up, please. And before we start, are there any members of the audience that wish to be recognized as objectors or parties in this conditional use hearing? This is actually a hearing. This is not just like public comment. This is a hearing. It's a legal process. You'd like to be recognized, sir? Could I have your name, please? Theodore Yobst?
Yes. Have him come to the podium.
And your address?
413 South Fifth Street.
Ted, could you come to the podium, please?
Sure.
Is there anyone else that wishes to be recognized as a party? Or at least just relax. You can, at this point, we'll take them one at a time, and then we'll give you your chance. You can stay there or at the chair right immediately adjacent, whatever is most comforting for you. I looked in detail as to the conditions for this. There are very few that really have much applicability to you. The major condition that I found that they must meet, first of all, the zoning officer wants a copy of a valid state license from the applicant so that it's on file at all times. And probably the most critical condition, there's quite a few in dealing with traffic and other laws and safety and stormwater and neighborhoods and site planning, all those they can go into if they want. But the most important one is parking. I'm going to lay it out for you. Just you're not represented tonight, are you, sir?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Just so the board knows exactly, or council knows exactly what we're dealing with. There is a provision in your zoning ordinance for, we call it shared use, and it is found at 602.K. Basically what it says is if you have property that's got one use, but then there's hours that they're not using it, you can allow another applicant to use it during those off hours for the parking. But you have to segregate those hours. So I'm going to nutshell this for you. There is a proposed business hours of 8 to 4:30 for the brewing operation, and Thursday and Friday 5 to 8 for the tap room operation, Saturday 12 to 8 for the tap room operation, and Sunday 12 to 5 for the tap room operation. Now, the number of parking spaces necessary, according to the zoning officer and my reading,
God bless you.
is you have to have 1.3 for each employee. There are 3 employees, so that comes to 4. So you'll have to have 4 for the employees, and then there's 2,000 square foot in the tap room. It must be considered the same as a tavern, and that comes, they simply divide it 40 into the 2,000, and it comes to 50 spaces. So the minimum they need is 54. So the only other issue is how you want to approach the shared use portion of it. And by that I mean the hours don't overlap except for Napa. Napa is open Saturday 8 to 6 and Sunday, and they use 5 spaces. So you could require 59 spaces, or you could require 54. I would say that it is open to your discretion. Now, with that, though, I'm going to turn it over to the applicant. Make sure I have it. It's Mr. Bonner, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to the applicant and let you explain why, to council, why you meet the conditions and for the conditional use that you propose.
Okay.
No.
I came prepared with just a very, very brief presentation, which I could hand out to the council members.
That's fine.
If that's okay.
While that's being handed out, I should also tell you I did check with the zoning officer. The property was advertised, posted, and notice were given to the adjoining property owners. So the law has been complied with for notice.
Thank you. And in the packet, there is a copy of our license from the state, but I could provide a clean copy because it's part of this presentation. And also attached to it is a memo to council from Mr. Farnsworth detailing his analysis of the parking. So that's also included in the back. And just as a very, very...
Do you concur with his analysis
I do.
for the parking? Do you believe that the number should be set by council at 59 because of Napa, or are you asking for 54?
I was asking for 54.
Is there a particular reason?
Well, really, there's no particular reason. There seems to be sufficient space in that facility to accommodate 54, 59, 70.
Probably doesn't matter because
It doesn't.
according to the Farnsworth, those spaces available for shared use are 74.
Right.
I'm trying to expedite this because I know you don't
Thank
have
you.
a lawyer. I'm trying to put all the facts in front of the council. But so you're asking for 59. They may set it at 54. That's their prerogative. And you'd have to maintain a valid license, which is your intention, obviously.
Yes.
I mean, the use would be conditioned on that.
Right.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add concerning the neighborhood, site planning, performance standards, traffic, general safety?
The only other piece of it is really to looking at the statutes. There's going to be no physical changes to the outside of the building, landscaping, etc., except for a sign where there's a sign. Another key is noise. Everyone, that's always a bone of contention. There's going to be no outside noises from the operation, or if there's, let's say, music in there, there's no intent to put a band outside and play. So if there is music inside, it should not be heard from outside the building, certainly outside the property. No odors, vibrations, or discharges. The other point which you made well is for the most part we're going to be open when all the other buildings are closed. So from a kind of a utilization, a green footprint, if you will, we're maximizing that particular space. We're looking to increase the number of jobs here in the borough by hiring some folks, and the other point was really co-locating where there's 2 existing breweries here. Currently, I'm operating over in the Bethlehem area, and I get a lot of people from out of town, outside of the Lehigh Valley, outside of the state. And the one thing about craft beer people is they don't really have a brand. They like to hit up a number of different places. So we tend to promote a lot of the ones in the Bethlehem area. So one of the nice things about potentially locating here in Emmaus is there's 2 others, and that makes it a little bit more of a magnet, and potentially you're bringing other people into the borough. Potentially other businesses could also benefit from folks coming in and purchasing their wares.
Do you have anything else?
In the presentation, I have just kind of a concept layout, which you can look at, and I also included some pictures of the site, kind of the overhead view, and a picture of the building. And that was all that I was prepared to talk about from the conditional use standpoint.
Based on Mr. Bonner's testimony, does any member of council have any questions on this conditional use?
I got one question. I got a couple questions. The first question is on your line drawing here. I only see one restroom.
There's actually inside of there, Jeff.
Yep.
There is there's actually there's a bathroom in there, and then there's another bathroom which is an ADA,
Okay.
and then there's an ADA shower. So in conversations with Mr. Farnsworth, it looks as though we're going to need 2 ADA bathrooms.
Yeah.
So we may be converting that ADA shower to an ADA bathroom and actually have ultimately 3 bathrooms.
Oh, okay.
Which a lot of my customers, more bathrooms, better.
True. My other question is, I'm very familiar with the craft beer industry, so the one thing that everyone does is they bring in food trucks. That would take up some parking, so how do you attend to, where would you be placing the food trucks?
The great question. That is part of the kind of the craft beer. I anticipate having food trucks, most likely when the weather is better.
Yep.
And that would take up, from looking at other spaces, it's typically 2 spaces,
2
a
spaces, yep.
food truck would take up.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So you had mentioned that sound-wise, there wouldn't be any sound outside. If ever you had a band or something like that, it would always be inside.
Yes.
I would assume, though, like the others have kind of expanded their area, there's a big overhead door on that. I would assume during the warmer months, you probably want that open so it has a very free-flowing
Yes.
in and out approach. Do you think that you would start to have a tent maybe outside of there or something that people would go in and out? And I'm not looking for you to create, think about this in the long term when you answer this
Okay.
question. I say in that you don't want to cut off your opportunities. I think that happened at the other 2 locations, and now we're dealing with that. So I ask that question is, if you were thinking about it in a big picture, would you say, yeah, we'd probably want people outside at some of these events if we had a grand opening or some sort of kickoff? Or
Great question. I would hate to rule it out. I don't, because from my perspective, I'm coming from a 730 square foot space where half of it is the brewery. So to me, 2,000 square feet is the most real estate I've ever seen. So while that would be a good problem to have, to kind of, okay, well, now I have more people than I need. I don't see it certainly initially, but I would hate to say, no, we would never have outdoor seating. If we did, we would have to make sure that the available spaces would still be sufficient.
okay, and then obviously, and I was actually going along the concern of noise. Even though you're in an industrial area, I think it's less impactful than it is in other areas. That could probably mean, though, then it would be more audible to people that are outside of it. If it's a big open space, it would naturally do that.
It would be, but from a music perspective, I like having an environment where people can actually talk with each other. So
Okay.
while there may be music in the background, it's certainly the noise with folks sitting outside would be really talk.
Okay, so you're feeling that your kind of vibe to your
It is.
establishment is more or less, all right, we're going to connect with the beer, not next like as
Exactly.
much the social end.
Exactly.
Okay.
Currently, I have a television in the tap room, but it typically has what the beer prices and any merchandise. My vibe is not to be a sports bar. My vibe is more of a craft beer, folks, where people get together in this age where folks are hyper polarized. The one thing that I've seen is people from two different worlds coming together, talking about craft beer, and having a great time. And that's why I do what I do.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Just further answer to your question, we could certainly put a proviso that there would be no tents or use for a tap room exterior to the building without coming back here. And that would be a condition that we could put on there. And if you wanted it, then you come back, explain how you're going to do it, and see what council's position was. But that's one of the advantages of conditional uses. You can put on reasonable conditions.
The
I'm
only
sorry, Mr. Anders?
Oh.
Just a question in regards to like supplies like kegs and so forth. Would, in your plan here, have things stored on the outside of the building or
No.
behind the building? So everything would be inside?
everything inside.
Okay, very good.
And that could be a condition, too.
Okay.
Jeff,
The
Yes.
I have a quick question for one of our councilmen because he's familiar. What are the latest hours that Funk's and Yergis is open?
Ask him.
Either one of you.
No. The latest hours?
Yes. Is that Friday and Saturday?
Yeah, Sundays 6
For
to
both
5.
of them?
7 and 5.
No, one of them's at 5. Yuri's at 5 and
On
Funk's
Sundays,
is at 7.
Funk's is at 7 on Sunday.
Yep.
And what is it for Friday and Saturday
Up to 11.
for both of them?
Yes.
So my question, and that was a setup for what the question. You're serving till 8 o'clock. Is there any reason why you're not going any later than that, or is there any maybe in the future that you would want to expand on that?
Potentially, I hate to be locked into those hours, but for the foreseeable future, since it's really kind of a one-man band, and I'm working another job, there's not a whole lot of reason for me to be open all the way to 11 o'clock. I just, again, my vibe is a different vibe, and if folks, want to go somewhere else after 8, they certainly can.
I guess I'm looking at not limiting you to a certain time. I don't know if that can be expanded, or if he come
At
back to
night,
us.
He can, yes, the applicant can come back. My concern about the timing is more the fact that they're shared spaces. And if the other I don't think it's right to give a shared space if the other people are actually operating. So I think those times probably do have to be locked in. The time at night, that's up to you if you want to
Well,
do
that's
it.
what I'm referring to.
That's
nighttime.
up to you.
Okay.
Fair.
He's in the 11 o'clock time.
One question regarding the shared space, and looking at the photos, I see some larger trucks, at certain points there. Have you had discussions with the neighboring businesses about the shared space, and do you have any feedback that they have provided you?
I do. The where you see those trucks, that's the Napa location, and according to George Reitz, the owner of the property, that those trucks ultimately get parked inside in the evenings, and they weren't using up a whole lot of spaces for Napa. He also had mentioned that, and unfortunately he's not here today. He's in Florida, but he had mentioned that it appears that Napa potentially may be moving out of that space.
Are there any other questions from council? Otherwise, I'm going to turn to Mr. It's Theodore, what's?
Yopes.
It's.
The mayor's son, okay. Got you. All right.
Can I ask?
Do you wish to?
Wes has something.
That's the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
for clarification purposes, so if we approve this as it is, but let's say, I mean, the things that I think both of us have hinted at, to expand any of these, the process, we would have to replicate this process, correct?
That is correct, because
Right.
otherwise he'd be violating the conditions that you are putting on his zoning ordinance.
Correct. So that's for permanent. If you wanted it for a single event, it would be done in the same manner?
Oh, I do have a question, since you just brought that up.
Normally, you don't do single event type things because it's really zoning, but you could. You could.
Okay, so if he one time said, you know what, we're going to do our grand opening, we're going to stay open till 11, we're putting a tent out there, we're going to have 3 food trucks, and I'm trying to think what else, and we're going to, and another business might be open that day, and you're going to have these things. I mean, so if he wanted to do that, he'd have to come back a single time?
Supposed to, and the whole purpose of that is the public has been given notice of what his current proposal is. That's not his current proposal.
Right, and I guess I'm trying to understand, make it so that future councils don't have to go through the process again to accommodate an expanding business, but that's why I ask.
To be very honest with you, I do not like conditional uses, because I'd rather have this handled by the zoning hearing board as a special exception. Same thing, but it puts a lot of extra work on council to come up with these answers and to oversee it, when it would be easier to have it overseen by the zoning hearing board. But there are some times that it's appropriate, and obviously this was part of the craft beer ordinance, and
Okay.
it's a conditional use.
Okay,
Some of the worst cases I handled were conditional uses.
gotcha.
I just have one question.
Yes.
Wes brought that up. As far as events go, do you do can releases such as, a one-day event where everybody shows up, lines up, sort of like a Black Friday sale?
We don't we don't do canning yet, but
Okay.
I could see that as a potential in the future.
Because I know other breweries run into
Yeah.
that issue where everybody shows up and there's no parking and they line up waiting to get the can release. Okay.
And the one thing that I'll add on the tent, we do work with some of the food vendors, and one of our favorite food vendors is Flying V. They don't have a food truck, they do have a tent that they set up and serve from.
Is
So
that
I would-
V? Is that
The-
V?
The V, yep,
Yeah,
Flying
okay.
V. So I would like to be able to have that tent.
How many spaces would it take up?
Typically, it's a 10 by 10
It's a 10.
tent, so that
what,
would be
three parking spaces
three
maximum?
parking spaces maximum.
Can we move on to Ted? Pardon? Move on to Ted?
We could do it, yes. Is there, first of all, is anybody else on council have questions? Because we'll come back to you if you still have more. All right, now, Mr. Yobst, once again, would you just state your name and address, and you can you'll have a choice. You may either present your case, or you can ask Mr. Bonner questions.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks for entertaining this. So this is a unique presentation. Actually, applaud him finding a choice in an industrial location that actually has parking compared to the other 2 locations. So I'm here not tonight to oppose his application, but I am here to talk to council about an opportunity. You heard your solicitor talk about reasonable conditions that can be placed on applications. And I think you have an opportunity here to take a property owner in the borough that doesn't necessarily follow the regulations of the borough and utilize this opportunity to place conditions that may impact, unfortunately, this application on the timing of that. So if I could, I brought some handouts for council.
Mr. Yobst, are these your suggested conditions? Is that what it is?
I'm going to go through briefly, and I realize everybody's time is important, but I just want to go through briefly, and I think those of you who are familiar with the property know what I'm going to talk about, but I brought these as tools for the record to show how this property owner just really doesn't care about the subdivision and land development or zoning ordinances of the borough, nor does he care about the Lehigh County Conservation District regulations. So What I've given to you, and unfortunately I only have 3 copies, so hopefully you can share them, but what I'll refer to, there's a letter dated August 29th, 2016, from the Lehigh County Conservation District to Mr. Reitz. And it's a compliance notice, and basically what it says is that he has started moving dirt with no approvals from the County Conservation District. He does not have a soil and erosion permit to move any dirt. Please tend to this and submit an application and get a permit and do it properly. They asked that he comply by September of 2016. So that's a little over a year old. Subsequently, the County Conservation District visited the site again in June of this year. They sent him another letter. Actually, they visited on May 25th, according to the June 2nd letter. And it essentially says the same thing. You haven't submitted an application. You haven't corrected the deficiencies. And please submit for a permit and correct the deficiencies. I had a conversation today. I went over to the County Conservation District, had a discussion with Sean Anluff, who is a county conservationist. Asked him straight up, has anything been done? Has he made an application? He very clearly said to me, no, he has not. So here we are, almost a year and a half later, and Mr. Reitz continues to just ignore what the County Conservation District is requiring. That property is in very close proximity to the Liberts Creek, which is a high-quality water stream. We also have borough water wells that all get impacted by silt and sediment and things of that nature. So on the back of the package are a few photos that I took on the property today. And what they demonstrate, or what they illustrate, are basically the hogging out of dirt that he did along his adjoining property's neighborhood or property line. Slopes are supposed to be 2 to 1. This is almost vertical cut. Every time it rains, additional erosion occurs. He put in Jersey barriers to try and prevent the erosion from going somewhere, but all it did is back up further on the back side of the Jersey barrier. As you get into a little bit closer view, you can see the exposed roots of the plants that come from the adjoining property. And then the last photo is up in the back where he has filled in the property to even be above the adjoining property. And it's filled in with mulch and debris and non-compactable fill, and it looks more like a dump than it does anything else. So I just wanted to bring this to council's attention as an opportunity to maybe use this application as a tool to get Mr. Reitz to comply with what the county is trying to get him to do, and also our zoning officer has submitted, way back when he moved dirt. Mr. Farnsworth sent this property owner a letter notifying him that he's in violation of the zoning ordinances because he was moving dirt more than 2 feet. You can't do that without a grading permit in the Borough of Emmaus. He did it. It still sits there today. He's made half an effort to apply to zoning, but never shows up to the zoning hearing board to actually hear the application. Just continues to string it along literally through the mud. So my request to you is to utilize this application as a tool to get Mr. Reitz to comply, because why should this landowner benefit financially from another tenant when he simply can't take care of his own house? So the proposal I have in front of you is simply this, and I apologize to this applicant, but it's the only tool as a borough resident and seeing somebody that doesn't play by the rules, I think it should be done. A couple of suggestions that you might want to consider. One is approve the application because I think it's a worthy application, but somewhere along his path you can't let him move in. So do you delay the certificate of occupancy until Mr. Reitz has a soil and erosion control permit from the county. He cleans up what he needs to clean up, and he meets the borough ordinances as well. That would be one suggestion. The other, which would be more severe, and perhaps I would ask you to refer to your solicitor, do you deny the application pending the lack of or poor behavior by this landowner? Obviously more severe, but I would ask that you consider these. You've heard the solicitor say in the preamble to the discussion tonight, you can place reasonable conditions on an application. And one of the conditions for a conditional use is stormwater, although not directly on point for this use. I think it's directly on point for the property. So that's all I have to say, and I really appreciate your consideration of my request.
Mr. Yobst, the county conservation organization, I don't know what the official title is. District. Do they have any enforcement tools that they can use? It's a year and a half since it was brought to their attention, and nothing has been done since then. Do they not have any enforcement tools to use?
They do. They can fine. Typically, the fines take cooperation from the governing jurisdiction or the municipality, the borough's cooperation as well.
And then the other half would be our zoning officer, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now, how long do you think this process would take for him to apply for all those permits that you're saying that would essentially end up delaying Cave Brewing Company?
So I'm glad you asked. So I'm a civil engineer, and as some of you know, I do land development in 5 states. And to hire a civil engineer and to do a stormwater erosion control plan with a civil engineer should be able to be done. The plan should be able to create it in 30 to 45 days. Where a year and a half later, he has obviously not hired anybody to do that. Once you apply, if you have an engineer that's competent and understands the regulations, they should be able to actually get a permit in 3 to 6 months.
Now, with that said, first and foremost, everything that Mr. Yobst says is true and accurate, and thank you for bringing that to council's attention. Mr. Reitz has been in front of the Planning Commission one time. It was not a well laid out plan. He was scorned by the Planning Commission, exactly what Mr. Yobst was referring to. He was supposed to come back. We haven't seen him since. It's probably been 4 or 5 months at this point. So he had an engineer with him. Like the engineer was actually here. He's the one that presented. So it's not that he doesn't have an engineer. It's that they're just not doing their part to take care of that stormwater issue. Now, as Mr. Liebenberg said, is that something to hold up Cave Brewing? That's for you guys to decide. But I did want to point out, and thank you for bringing it to their attention, that there is a major issue with the property owner, especially with it. And you guys have heard that complaint because I've talked to you about that with the idea that he just started digging the hill out with no permits, no permission, no anything. And Mr. Farnsworth went there and proceeded with contacting the Conservation District.
Can he be fined?
Yes.
Yes.
Are we in that process?
I don't know.
I don't know where they are with the process. I thought that the understanding was that he was going through the permitting process. So they probably said as long as he's going through the permitting process. I haven't talked to Mr. Farnsworth about it lately, but that's certainly something that we can move forward on.
Let me address something here. You have a valid concern, but Mr. Reitz is basically a landlord. The applicant, although he had to sign it to show that there was an interest in this, in the fact that he would get rent, it's really the applicant is Cave Brewing Company, LLC, who's represented by Jeffrey Bonner. The courts tend to look askew at punishing an applicant or a third party for something that can be remedied under the law in an appropriate manner, such as a fine or a zoning violation, because there's a zoning enforcement notice, or a myriad of ways to bring that to a head. And also pressure could be put on the county soil erosion control and sediment organization, and they will eventually act. So the real question that comes down, I know Judge Simpson wrote a decision where some people weren't paying their taxes, and the municipality said, well, we won't let you have a licensing ordinance for your apartments. And Judge Simpson and the Commonwealth Court held that you could, there was an adequate remedy for not paying your taxes, which is a lien and your sale, and that's the way that should be proceeded, and you should not tie one to the other because it's not fair. If they meet the ordinance for that apartment, that's fine. I would tend to think that that would be the similar result in this case, that there is adequate remedies at law to address your problem, and having the applicant, I'm not here to advocate for him, he probably should have his own lawyer to do that, but the applicant certainly has no control over what the landlord is doing. So it becomes a very close issue. This is one that I could not guarantee you a result on. Tried to answer that as best I could, but go ahead.
So I believe in this space there was previously a gym, like a
CrossFit or something?
yeah, some sort of like triathlete, I think triathlon
Yeah.
type training. And I know that hasn't been out of there for too long. I think it actually just recently left. So that was obviously a conforming use. So if we put that punishment, for lack of a better term, in place, he could just say, okay, we're not going to do Cave Brewing and rent to someone else. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because it's only connected to this conditional use, so it might.
Well, you don't
Be too short term. I mean,
Many uses don't need conditional uses.
Right,
to
exactly.
go in there.
So
Right.
it really is only hurting the applicant.
That's why I have that's why I was trying to warn you gently that it's probably something that I may not be able to uphold as a reasonable condition.
So
Can-
again, I'm not a civil engineer here, so nothing by this business coming in here is gonna make that situation worse. That situation is what it is, correct? So you're just saying, let's find a way to get this guy to do what he's supposed to do, the landlord.
Yeah, so
Do what
let
he's
me
supposed to
interject. I mean, I think I can't argue with the solicitor, right? I think,
You can.
You can
no,
argue.
I won't.
You can argue.
I won't.
Go ahead.
I would argue if
But
I
he's a
paid-
pro at it.
We do
so.
sometimes.
I don't pay him, so I won't argue. I guess indirectly I
That way you
do.
do with your taxes.
But-
We could change
all,
that.
all humor aside, I can't disagree with what he's saying, right? So this is really about bringing this to your attention. And, you know, quite frankly, I think council and code enforcement has done a really nice job recently with some of our problem properties in town, right? So we have some that have been cleaned up, that have been eyesores for a while. I know there's still work to do on a few. I would consider this property now to be one of them in terms of, not that it looks bad, but it's a threat to the environment, right? And really, this is a request for someone with some mechanism and some reasonable time to take this on with this property owner and make them comply with the ordinances for fear of the environment, because our drinking water is not far from there.
So, Mr. Yopes, I'm gonna put this on the codes
Oh,
enforcement
it's been there
committee.
for a year. We've been talking about it, we've been
Well,
bringing it up, and
let's bring
nothing's
it back
happened.
up on
I
the
mean,
table and let's,
It goes back to us saying, oh, the county's taking care of it.
Well, I think
Yeah.
here's what we need to do.
I
Instead
think
of
you
putting
can
it on the
contact
committee,
them and.
Yeah.
I think it's
Go
outside
right
the
to
committee. I think it needs to go right here to the solicitor.
We can take.
Because we're going in a circle.
I think at this point, let's put it on the solicitor.
I'm fine with that.
Let's
yeah.
have him push for enforcement action with our zoning department and ram it down their throat to comply. I mean, that's what needs to probably happen here.
Yeah, I truly don't think it should be, I think Mr. Barrett hit the nail right on the head. There's a lot of permitted uses that you'd have no say over. And it's relatively unfair to take one, to add a condition that this man couldn't use it. Well, I could walk in there and use it for something else. When you have valid enforcement mechanisms for those particular problems. And we'll look at it. We're going to admit your packet of information as objector. We'll call you a semi-objector, but an objector 1. We're going to admit Mr. Connor's Cave Brewing Company documents as Exhibit 2. Are there any other questions? Because I think the hardest thing for you will now be to tell me what you want as conditions, if any, for the
Thank you,
grant
Mr.
of this
Jones.
conditional use.
I would personally like to see 59 spaces as a conditional use, because if they're going to put a food truck in there or a tent, that still allows what's required. Also, I would like a conditional use that if they want to set up, eventually expand outside, that they come back before council and explain their setup. And also that conditional use that there be no storage outside unless they come before council again. So those would be my suggestions.
What was the tent one? I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
That if they want to expand outside, that
Yeah.
they have to come before council and
Okay, I agree- I
explain
agree.
their setup and what they're going to use it for.
I would agree with that for its location. It's right in the front. I mean, if
So
you're gonna put it in the front,
59
that's not
spaces,
safe.
conditional use, if they want to expand outside, to come back before council, and if they want to have storage outside, come before
Come before
council.
council.
Okay, could I suggest some others that will be necessary, I think? First of all, we'll want a condition that they keep and maintain and produce a valid state license.
Okay.
Second, we give them the require 59 spaces, but since they're shared spaces, that the hours of operation be the requested hours that are set forth in the application. That's 8 to 4:30 for the business, Thursday and Friday 5 to 8 for the tap room, Saturday 12 to 8 for the tap room, and Sunday 12 to 5 for the tap room.
Hold on, you're killing me here.
Can I, Mr. Solicitor?
Okay.
Mr.
I will-
Thursday and Friday for the top room, or what?
They're right here, Shane. They're